at our Congress. And now one of the main speakers, we will leave the floor to James Rickards, who is an editor at Strategic Intelligence. He is also the author of many best-selling books. He's also an economy expert. Johns Hopkins University, Georgetown University, Trinity College Dublin, USA Naval Academy, Defense Academy, and Advanced Studies are some of the institutions that he is a visiting lecturer. He is an advisor on capital markets to the Director of National Intelligence and the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Mr. Rickards holds an LLM from the NYU School of Law. And now we will leave the floor to him. Can you hear us, sir?
Yes, I can.
We are honored to James Rickards in our stage, and who is an investment advisor, lawyer, investment banker, author, and economist. Mr. Rickards, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Very happy to, very honored to be participating with the 5th Turkish Capital Markets Congress. Thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person. We're all suffering from some travel restrictions because of the pandemic, but I've been to Turkey many times over the years, of course, Istanbul, but also Izmir, Fethiye, Bodrum, and many other places around Turkey. It's a beautiful country, wonderful people, and I look forward to being able to return, hopefully sooner than later, but at least we've been able to organize this video presentation, so very happy to be with you. My topic today is the future of money. We all sort of take money for granted. We think we know what it is. We have various forms of money, but I want to actually start there with the definition of money. If we're going to talk about the future of money, it's a good idea to understand where we're starting from, or just what money is. There's economists have a standard definition. They say money has 3 roles. One, it's a store of value. So if you have money, you have some value and you can keep it. 2, it's a unit of account. It's a way of measuring things, whether it's profit or loss or asset size or performance or the growth of an economy, et cetera. It's a scorecard. And 3rd, and probably most important, it's a medium of exchange. Obviously, it's meant to replace any kind of barter system. Barter systems are very inefficient, but money systems tend to be much more efficient. So it has that 3-part definition: a store of value, a unit of account, and a medium of exchange. One interesting question, and this may be more important for the future, more of what we'll be talking about in a few minutes, is whether any form of money today can perform all 3 functions. Some can perform, some claim to be money and don't do any of them very well. Some may do 2 out of 3. So I think as we go forward, we need to think about whether we're actually using multiple forms of money at the same time, because no single form of money performs all 3 functions. But for now, the major currencies, certainly the US dollar, the euro, yen, new Turkish lira, and other currencies in their countries or even internationally perform all 3 functions. But of course, throughout history, many things have been money: beads, feathers, shells, obviously gold and silver, the major currencies I mentioned today. We have new digital forms of payments. We'll talk about cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in a few minutes. But a lot of people object to the fact that they're not backed by anything. They say, you know, the US dollar is not backed by anything. It's legal tender in the United States, but it's not convertible into gold easily, or the euro is not backed by anything. Even Bitcoin, they say, well, Bitcoin is not backed by anything. It's a digital record, not much more than that in my view, but people look at any form of money and say it's not backed by anything. But you can say the same thing about gold. I mean, gold is gold. It's an element. It's a metal. It's atomic number 79, but there's nothing behind gold. Gold can back something else, but gold itself is not backed by anything. And I point out that actually all of these forms of money, dollars, euros, new Turkish lira, gold, Bitcoin, Japanese yen, or any other form of money that you want to think of is backed by one thing. And it's the same thing, which is confidence. And that's all there is to it. That's all you need to have money. If I'm confident that something is money and I can give it to you and you'll accept it in exchange for goods and services, and furthermore, you're confident that you can give it to someone else and they'll offer goods and services, then that's money. So confidence is the key. Confidence is what backs all forms of money. But unfortunately, people take that for granted. Confidence is fragile. It's easily lost and very difficult to regain. And one of my concerns, and we'll talk more about this, is that central banks in particular take confidence for granted. They assume that users, citizens, trading partners, investors will always have confidence in their money. And so they can move interest rates around. They can print as much as they want. They can borrow as much as they want, but it will always be money. And that's not true. History shows that, as I say, under certain conditions, confidence is lost, and then the value of that particular form of money is destroyed. So whenever you're wrestling with the issue, what's backing the money? Why is it money? Always come back to that one word, confidence. That's what makes money money. You believe you can get something for it, and others do as well. That shared belief is what supports the value of money. Now, I want to, again, get to the future money by raising the issue of what's called, sometimes called the Great Reset. You've probably heard the expression. Interestingly, it comes from two different sources, completely opposing sources. One group are what I would call everyday investors, citizens, retail investors, small savers. And when they talk about the Great Reset, they really talk about a new international monetary system, perhaps organized at some conference, something like the Bretton Woods Conference of 1944. But however it might be organized, it's the view that the current system is unsustainable. Debts are too high, deficits are too high, money printing is out of control, that little by little, central banks, by printing too much, borrowing too much, spending too much, central banks and countries are destroying the value of money. They're destroying the confidence that I talked about a minute ago, that some change is going to be required. It may be a gold standard, but not necessarily, but something's going to have to happen, limits on deficits, limits on spending or debt to, again, as I say, restore or bolster confidence. And that whatever that structure might be, and it remains to be seen, it could be negotiated, that would be the Great Reset. We're going to reset the international monetary system. But the same expression, the Great Reset, is also used by global elites for what they view as a way of implementing world money. When I say global elites, it's not some deep, dark conspiracy. We know who they are. It would be people like Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, Christine Lagarde, now head of the European Central Bank, formerly head of the IMF, Mark Carney, who was at various times head of the Bank of Canada, then the Bank of England, then chairman of the BIS, the Bank for International Settlements, now co-chairman, along with Michael Bloomberg, of the GFANZ, that's the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. That's the mashup of monetary policy and climate change policy. We don't have to spend a lot of time on that, but Mark Carney is kind of your ultimate insider, but many others, Jay Powell, Mario Draghi, others around the world. So we know who they are. They're the global elites or the power elites. When they talk about a Great Reset, they mean something very different. They mean more of a top-down structure, some kind of world money, which would go hand in hand with world governance and world taxation. So this is, sometimes called the New World Order, but it would basically erase national boundaries, erase continental boundaries, and replace it with some form of world government. And of course, world government would need world money. And that's what they mean by the Great Reset. By the way, the climate change, which is mostly climate alarm, the science is not really there to support the notion of extreme climate change or an existential crisis. That's not true. Is there mild global warming? Perhaps. Do humans cause it? That's worth study. That's not clear. But the elites that I refer to are using climate change as in effect, a facade or a front to impose this new world order I described. If you want a global solution, such as world money, it's good to have a global problem, such as climate change, because climate does not, to the extent it changes at all, it does not stop at national borders. It's a true global phenomenon. So it's good to pick a global problem if you're trying to impose a global solution. By the way, the pandemic has performed much the same function. Again, viruses don't stop at national borders. This pandemic is truly global. So that's another hobby horse, if you will, another vehicle for the global elites to advance their agenda of world government. But world money would be a big part of it. So you've got the bottom up Great Reset of people who are losing confidence in the international monetary system. And then you have the top down Great Reset from the elites who are trying to impose some form of world money. Both of these things are possible. Both of these things are being pursued. Certainly the world money Great Reset version I just described is actively being pursued. We see progress toward it every day, and I can talk some more about that. So this is something to watch. If this is the way the world is going, and it is, we should probably talk about, well, what might be the new form of world money if we're going to have a Great Reset, if we're going to have world money, if we're going to see a loss of confidence in current forms of money and transactions, what would be the replacement? And here I have four candidates, four types of money. I'll describe them, but bear in mind that there could be others or there could be hybrids. But the four are gold. Interesting, gold is the oldest form of money, but it might be a new form of money in the 21st century. The second are cryptocurrencies, most prominently Bitcoin, of course, but we'll talk about others, but really cryptocurrencies generally. The third are special drawing rights, SDRs. This is the IMF, International Monetary Fund's form of world money. And the fourth version would be central bank digital currencies, which are different from cryptocurrencies, and we'll talk about that. So gold, cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin, special drawing rights, and central bank digital currencies are the four candidates to be a new form of world money. So you can think of it like a horse race with four horses in the race. Let's see who wins. So let's take these one at a time and talk a little bit more about them. Again, not just historically, the history is important, but in this 21st century context I'm describing. The first is gold. Everyone knows what it is. It's as I mentioned, the oldest form of money. The first gold coins. I mean, gold has been around as an element, as a metal, since the records have been kept as long as history or civilization has existed. But the first gold coins, medium of exchange, were minted actually in present-day Turkey, what is present-day Turkey, in the 6th century BC. But it could be a future form of money because it inspires the kind of confidence I described. Everyday retail investors don't seem to have a big interest in gold. Certainly Americans, we're now under 3 generations of people who have been either not taught about gold as money or misinformed one way or the other. My graduate degree in international economics was in 1974. And my class was the last class that was taught gold as a monetary asset. If you're younger than I am and you know anything about gold, you're either self-taught or you went to mining college because the universities stopped teaching it decades ago. But it's still around, still performs these functions. But what is most interesting, if you said who's buying gold today, some retail investors in Asia and other, but it's mostly the central banks. The central banks are by far the largest buyers of gold. And we see this particularly in the case of Russia. Between 2009 and 2021, so a period of 12 years, Russia has more than tripled its gold reserves. They've gone from about 600 metric tons to about 2,400 metric tons. Gold now composes 20% of the Russian reserve position. In round numbers, their total reserves are about 500 billion, a little bit larger, and they have about $500 billion equivalent. They have over $100 billion in gold, or 20% of their reserves, the rest being in German bonds or U.S. Treasury notes or other forms of high quality instruments, and some Chinese yuan. But again, gold is 20% of the reserves. China has done the same thing. They've gone from 600 tons in 2009 to almost 2,000 tons today that they report. But there's good reason to believe that China has far more gold than that, that it's off the books in something called the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, SAFE in English, that they keep the gold, and then occasionally they move it in a bookkeeping entry to the People's Bank of China, to the reserve position. So 2,000 tons approximately officially, but good reason to think that number could be much higher, perhaps as high as 4,000 tons. Turkey has been buying quite a bit of gold. Kazakhstan, Vietnam, Mexico. Recently, I saw this, doing some research, and I was very struck by it. Japan increased their gold reserves by over 50 metric tons. Now, for decades, as far back as I had looked at for a long time, 30 years or more, Japan was showing about 600 metric tons. It was just flat for decades. And then just a few months ago, that went up to over 650 metric tons. Now, Japan did not go out overnight and buy 50 metric tons. That didn't happen. Again, they had that gold all along, but they chose to make an accounting entry to move it to their reserve position. It was in some off the books position. I'm not sure if it's at the Ministry of Finance. It doesn't matter. So it raises the interesting question. So why would Japan all of a sudden want to show the world that it had a lot more gold than we knew? Again, 600 tons for 30 years, and all of a sudden over 650 metric tons. Were they sending a message to China, to the United States? They certainly had some intention behind it, but Japan wanted to show that it was a gold power. As Russia is increasing their reserves, China is increasing their reserves, and other countries as well. I mentioned Turkey. Iran is certainly active in buying gold. All of a sudden, here comes Japan out of the blue with a more than 50 metric ton addition. So central banks have been net buyers since 2010. They continue to be very active buyers. The amounts are quite large. Some are transparent. Russia is. Some are non-transparent. China is not very transparent. But my message to investors is, if central banks are buying gold as fast as they can, perhaps you might want to consider getting some gold in your portfolio as well. But again, Turkey is very prominent in this regard. And I'll just wrap up by saying gold has many attractions, even though it seems primitive in the 21st century digital age. That's actually one of the attractions of gold. It's not digital, it's physical. You can't hack it. You can't steal it online. You can't erase it. You can't freeze it. So what that means is that gold is a very good reserve asset if you're worried about sanctions. And certainly the United States is very active in putting sanctions on a lot of countries, freezing accounts. We've done this to many countries around the world. Others are doing the same thing. So if you as a central bank or finance minister are concerned about economic sanctions, keeping some of your gold, keeping some of your reserves in gold, in physical gold, in your own vaults, not in New York, not in London, but in your own vaults, makes you sanction proof. There's no way anyone can steal that gold, short of some kind of military action. So it's very robust to that. It's not something that's very easy to seize. Gold is clearly a store of value and can be a unit of account, particularly if you think of gold by weight, not by a dollar equivalent, but by a weight of gold, a kilo or a metric ton or 100 metric tons, as the case may be. It does not have much of a role today as a medium of exchange. You can by arrangement, but you don't usually go out and buy things with gold. But that's something that can be very easily remedied with a gold-backed digital payment system. So it's almost digital gold. So you'd have the physical gold here. For an individual, you could have a debit card or a credit card backed by the gold, and then you just go spend it in hotels and airplanes and restaurants and anything you like. And the bank would reduce your gold account based on the current market value. So we already have some systems like this. They could become more ubiquitous, more guaranteed by banks that are themselves too big to fail. But we might see this kind of mashup between ancient physical gold and new digital technology, giving us a kind of a digital payment system backed by gold. So I'll leave it at that, but don't discount the role of gold. Certainly, central banks are not doing so. The second form of money, again, we'll see how it plays out in the future, are cryptocurrencies. Here, primarily, we're talking about Bitcoin, but we all know there are something like 6,000 different cryptocurrencies at the moment. So new ones every day. So they're plentiful, but they're really just a handful of Bitcoin, Ripple, Ethereum, and just one or two others that have most of the attention. These are not money, in my view. They don't meet the criteria of money. They're not a good store value. I understand Bitcoin goes up a lot. It's been up over $60,000 recently. It's crashed twice. It crashed in 2018. It crashed again last year, but it came back, and now it's up close to all-time highs again. Well, that's interesting, but it does not make it a very good store value. You really don't know what it's worth in terms of dollars or euros or Turkish lira, for that matter, from day to day. It's not a good medium of exchange. You can't really buy anything with it. A few things, they're sort of gimmicky, but it's not widely accepted in payment. And it's not a good unit of account for the same reason it's not a good store of value, because the value in terms of other currencies is extremely volatile and extremely uncertain. Now, currencies do fluctuate. If you look at the U.S. Euro U.S. dollar exchange rate, so here's the U.S. dollar, here's the euro. Yeah, they move around, but they tend to stay in bands. They don't go to far extremes. In fact, the euro today is not far from where it started in 1999. It was launched at equivalent of $1.16. I think today, 21 years later, it's about $1.15. And it has moved around. It's been as high as $1.60 and as low as 80 cents. But those are both extremes. It trades pretty much in more of a band between $1.05 and $1.40. And right now it's where it was 21 years ago. So, but you don't see the extreme movements that you do in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So they're not really suitable. So if they don't meet the criteria of money, they could potentially, but they don't now. What are they? Are they an asset class? Some people will say so. To me, it's more of a casino chip. You go into a casino, you put your money down, the dealer or croupier gives you some chips. You can gamble with them. You can lose a lot of money. You can make a lot of money. Same thing in Bitcoin. You can lose money or make money, but it's not an asset class. It's a speculative form. It's a casino chip. It's a form of gambling. If you like to gamble, you can go to a casino where you can buy Bitcoin, but it's not a good form of money. It's not a good store of value. So it doesn't really meet the definition of money. People talk a lot about the blockchain. Blockchain is not new, by the way. Blockchain technology has been around since the 1980s. It's just a ledger that's verified or certified by some consensus mechanism of all the users. There are different formulas for that. One can be the weight of mining power. Some can be what they call white hat system, where you have referees who decide what's valid or not. Some use a consensus method. There are various methods of validating an entry on a blockchain. They all have certain vulnerabilities, but so that is useful for record keeping. I mean, if you want to keep a stock ledger or real estate or other forms of property on a blockchain distributed ledger, that's perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that. But and that by itself does not make Bitcoin money. It's just another use of the blockchain technology, but it's not clear what use Bitcoin itself has. There is something called a permissioned ledger. This is a form of blockchain where permission blockchain where the only people who get to use it have to have permission or acceptance from some regulating power. So it could be the IMF, it could be a central bank, it could be some private association, but they only let certain entities, certain qualified members into the system. That, again, limits the use on the one hand, but it creates a payment system or transfer system that's much faster and more efficient. We might see something like that. I mentioned I would talk about these various forms of money, and there were some hybrid applications. You might have a permissioned blockchain ledger in special drawing rights. So the IMF might say, we're going to make the SDR, the special drawing right money, but we're going to use a blockchain digital technology as a way of keeping track of who lent it, who spent it, who borrowed it, who has received some, or who wants to trade some. So we may see, again, we may see something like a permission blockchain in a digital SDR. I'll talk more about that in a minute. One of the problems with Bitcoin in particular is market manipulation is rampant. So people say, oh, it went up $1,000 a coin today, it went up $2,000 a coin. And on a mark-to-market basis, that means every Bitcoin, every coin or token is worth that much more, and the entire market capitalization went up by that amount. But it doesn't mean that every Bitcoin got traded that day. In fact, most of them are just held. They're held in digital wallets or on exchanges or various kinds of accounts. They're not particularly liquid, and they're not traded at all. But some of them are traded, and then that new value is then imputed to all the remaining Bitcoin. But what if you had two large players, A and B? A sells a Bitcoin to B sells it back to A sells it back to B sells it back to A. They just keep selling the same Bitcoin back and forth at higher prices every time and reporting it on the exchange. Well, the talking heads on financial TV get all spun up and go, oh, look at the price of Bitcoin. It's going up and up and up, and people made billions of dollars. And on paper, at least, that might be true, but it's nothing more than what the stock market would call painting the tape. It's just a form of market manipulation. It's not real liquidity, and it's not real depth of market. And it doesn't mean that certainly if everyone tried to sell the Bitcoin at those levels, you'd see the greatest crash in history. So that's one. That form of market manipulation is something to be concerned about. There's another form called the stable coin. A stable coin is one where you take $1 or $1,000 or whatever amount it is, and you buy a cryptocurrency that claims to always be worth $1. So you put $1 in, you get a token, and then if you were to put the token back in, sell the token to an exchange, you'd get the dollar back. It does not go up and down the way Bitcoin is. It's always worth, one token equals $1 or whatever the fixed rate is. So they call these stable coins because the dollar value is stable. Well, if that's true, what does the issuer of the coin, what does the exchange or the broker do with the money I give them? I give them dollars and I get these stable coins. Tether is the best known, but there are some others. What do they do with the dollars? Well, no one knows, actually. They're not transparent. Some are a little more transparent than others. They claim they invest in commercial paper. Well, okay, but commercial paper is just an IOU. So it's only as good as the person issuing the commercial paper. Who's issuing the commercial paper? They don't tell you. Are they very high quality corporations? Like Apple, a computer, for example, well, their commercial paper might be okay. Or are they affiliated entities? Is this whole thing a Ponzi, a scheme to basically steal money from investors? We don't know. So I'm not putting that accusation out there, but I am raising the possibility because they're non-transparent, non-accountable, non-regulated. And most of the money used to buy Bitcoin is in the form of Tether. So people give dollars to Tether to get Tether. They use Tether to buy the Bitcoin, but no one knows what the Tether's worth because we don't know where the dollars went. And if you were to sell Bitcoin, you'd probably get Tether and then turn in your Tether for dollars, and the whole thing might disappear. Again, I'm not saying that it is a fraud. I'm saying that you can't rule out that possibility based on the very limited disclosures we have. So we are definitely looking at forms of market manipulation, painting the tape, unaccountable stable coins that are used to buy the Bitcoin. This whole thing it has the potential to be a house of cards waiting to collapse. That doesn't mean it collapses tomorrow. And I'm not saying it won't go higher, which brings me to my final remarks on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, which are people trying to analyze them are focused on the wrong thing. They're looking at the price. They're looking at occasional collapses, new highs. They use all these technical analysis that we have for stocks and bonds, charts and head and shoulders formations and 50-day moving average and new all-time highs. These are all concepts that we use in the stock market, for example. But stocks are real companies. They make real things. Even some of them are, overpriced or bubbly or prone to failure. That happens in stock markets. But there's something there. And then we use these technical analysis to understand it. In the case of Bitcoin, we use the technical analysis, but there's nothing there. As Gertrude Stein once said when she returned to Oakland after many years, there's no there. So again, I think it's misleading when people have all these ways of analyzing price movements in the time series of prices without ever stopping to ask, well, what is it we're pricing exactly? And as I said earlier, it's not money; it's some kind of casino chip. But if all that's irrelevant or not very important, I call it the content. What is important? Well, here we go back to the theory of communications, and in particular, a scholar in the 1960s and 70s named Marshall Mcluhan. Mcluhan was famous for saying the medium is the message. And he used that to refer to television at the time, which was fairly new technology, but it can be applied to any electronic technology. And people complained in the 1960s, they said television is junk. You have detective shows and cowboy shows and game shows, and there was a lot of silliness and not very much substance. And Mcluhan said, you're focused on the wrong thing. Don't worry about the content. Think about the medium itself. The medium is the message. We're surrounded by this electronic bubble, and we're scarcely aware of it. It's affecting our brains. It's affecting the way we think, but we don't really understand how. And a good metaphor for understanding what he meant was, we say we don't know who discovered water, but we're pretty sure it was not a fish. Meaning fish don't know what water is. They're in the water. They're immersed in it. They're surrounded by it. You have to take a fish out of the water, and then the fish says, where's the water? But when they're in the water, they take it for granted. They don't know. We're in this electronic world, and we don't exactly understand what it's doing to us. But one of the things it's doing is it's changing the way we think. And this has happened before once in history in the 5th century BC. And this here I'll refer to book 10 of Plato's Republic. Most of us have read the Republic at one time or other, probably in college, maybe more recently. But in book 10, Plato attacked Homer. He attacked the epic poets who had conveyed Greek tradition and history and stories and myths and a lot else beside, through reciting poetry. And in print editions today, the Iliad it's over 1,000 pages. And I can barely memorize a poem that's maybe 20 lines. How do people memorize a poem that goes for 1,000 pages? Well, the answer is repetition. It was repeated over and over and over again in gatherings, in public forums, in presentations. You heard it so many times. But the point is, it was not put in writing. Writing really didn't develop until around the 6th century BC, a little bit earlier, but not much earlier than that. But these epic poems go back to the 8th century BC or even earlier, back to the Bronze Age. So before Plato, we were living in a world of an acoustic world, an oral world where you hear things. And the epic poems were not just poems. When Plato criticized them as being poems, he wasn't using the word poem in the way we use it today. He was using it to refer to what an epic poem was, the purpose, which was really an encyclopedia. It was history, it was culture, it was etiquette. It told you how to act. It portrayed good actions, it portrayed bad actions. It let you know which were good and which were bad, which were acceptable, which were not, which should be avoided. So it was a complete encyclopedia of the culture. It happened to be in poetic form with rhythm and meter and rhyme and alliteration because it made it easier to memorize. but the purpose of it was educational, it was didactic. And Plato said, no, we've got to get rid of that system, get into a written system, a linear system, so we can be rational and more scientific. Well, Plato was the transitional figure from an acoustic culture to a written linear culture. There were some before Plato, Socrates, and some others, but Plato was really the key figure. Today, and this is my point about Bitcoin, we're going back to the same transition, but we're moving in the other direction. We're moving after 2,500 years. We're moving from a linear written culture into an acoustic culture. You can't go anywhere without hearing music. You see people in their cars with the stereos turned up. The television is, you think of it as visual, but it's really an acoustic medium because you have to really, it absorbs you into the image, which is coming from behind the screen and surrounding you. So, but we're not getting Homer these days. We're getting hip hop and some other acoustic elements. But the point is, it affects the brain, affects the way we think. It's more tribal. And as far as Bitcoin's concerned, it was invented in 2009. But if you think of millennials, people in their 30s today, you're 30 years old, let's say, or younger, or even Generation Z, if you happen to be 20 years old, these generations grew up playing video games from the age of 5, maybe younger. Well, in video games, there's money. There was digital money, not with the invention of Bitcoin in 2009. There was digital money in these video games 30 years ago. And when you play them, you can use a credit card or dollar, basically dollars or lira or whatever the currency is, to buy digital currency inside the game. And they give them different names, swords or thrones or crowns or whatever you want to call it. And you can use that to buy more armies in your digital game or a nicer house or whatever it might be. So the millennial generation have been dealing with digital currencies, invented digital currencies for 25 years or 30 years. So when Bitcoin comes along, it might have been new to the older generation, but it was quite familiar to the younger generations. And that's why they're big adopters of Bitcoin. But my point is, this is not strange to them. This is not new. This is something they've had since birth in video game form. And what we're seeing is really the gamification of finance. We're losing track of what money is. And just to wrap up on this, the society becomes more tribal, less rational. Bitcoin will not replace the dollar, but it may destroy the dollar by destroying the concept of moneyness. We may get to a point where we don't even know what money is anymore. And that could have very serious societal consequences. Let me just turn quickly to special drawing rights. This is the IMF World Money. I talked a little bit about this earlier. Created in 1969 at a time when there was waning confidence in the dollar or perceived dollar shortage. It was originally backed by gold, not for long, only for about 5 years, but it was backed by gold. It was actually referred to as paper gold. Originally, one SDR equaled $1 US. Today, one SDR is about $1.40. So it shows how the dollar has devalued even against the SDR, let alone other currencies and gold. These were issued by the IMF. Everyone knows the US Federal Reserve has a printing press. It can print dollars. The European Central Bank has a printing press. It can print euros. Well, the IMF has a printing press. They can print special drawing rights. They can print SDRs. They give them to members of the IMF. But a little known aspect of the bylaws, the IMF is allowed, they are permitted to give SDRs to multilateral organizations such as the United Nations. So they would need a vote to do this. I'm not saying they can just do it willy-nilly, but the IMF could issue SDRs to the United Nations to finance a climate change agenda, which could radically alter the world economy. They haven't done that, but they have the ability to do that. So again, you need to keep an eye on what the IMF is doing. They issued some SDRs, relatively small amounts between 1970 and 1981. Then there were none issued for almost 30 years. After 1981, there was no new issue until 2009 in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis. And then they did a very large issue this year, about $650 billion equivalent. So, again, they haven't forgotten about it. They're expanding the pool of SDRs, trying to create SDR notes. have companies borrow in SDRs. It may get to the point where the SDR, the special drawing right, is a form of world money used by the members to settle balance of trade, used for finance purposes. Perhaps the financial statements of the 100 or so largest corporations in the world will be stated in SDRs, at which point the US dollar would be just a local currency. It would be like Mexican pesos or any other local currency, not the leading global currency anymore. That could be displaced by SDRs. And again, there's no reason why SDRs cannot be issued in digital form. A digital SDR could be another form of world money, and then it could be even pegged to central bank digital currencies. So let me pivot to that, and we'll finish up this list. So what are central bank digital currencies? They are not cryptocurrencies. They are digital. They can be kept in a ledger, but it's not a blockchain. The message traffic is encrypted. So to that extent, they are encrypted digital currencies issued by central banks, but they're not blockchain and they're not cryptocurrencies because these are very much controlled. The ledger itself is not a distributed ledger. It's controlled by the central bank itself. The other thing to bear in mind is that these are not new currencies. So if the Federal Reserve had a central bank digital dollar, it would still be a dollar. If the European Central Bank had a central bank digital euro, it would still be a euro or a Japanese yen, or if Turkey chose to do this, it would be a digital new Turkish lira. So it's not a new form of money or a new currency, rather. It is a new payment system and a new way to hold the money in the sense that it's completely digital. You would have it on your iPhone or your Samsung phone or Nokia, whatever kind of smartphone you have. You'd have an app. You would have an account directly with the central bank. I keep some of my money in a bank. I have a bank account. I'm sure we all do. Well, imagine if you had an account with the central bank. And if you want to pay someone, you just go to your app and say, pay. You give the wire instructions, and the central bank moves the digital currency from A to B, but you completely disintermediate the banking system. Today, if I use a credit card, or any of you use a credit card to buy something, the merchant who sells you that, they have to get paid. So they sell that receivable to what's called a merchant acquirer. This is a wholesale financial institution, but they take a 2.5% fee. So if I spend $100, the merchant only gets $97.50 because the merchant acquirer takes $2.50 for a transaction fee. Then the merchant acquirer bundles all these receivables from all these individual merchants and delivers them to MasterCard or Visa and gets paid. And then MasterCard or Visa takes an even larger bundle and presents them to the banks that issued the credit cards, and then they get paid. And then the bank that issued the credit card sends me a bill and I pay the bill. But you've got sort of 5 intermediaries there. You've got the merchant acquirer, MasterCard, the bank, and myself. 5 parties, fees all along the way. It's very inefficient and slow and costly. Well, imagine if you could eliminate all that with just central bank digital currencies with an account at the central bank, and they would handle all the due froms or due tos with no fees or minimal fees. Well, that's interesting. It sounds efficient and fast, but you would completely disintermediate the banking system, at least at the retail level, and perhaps eliminate the need for MasterCard and Visa or other forms of payment. So these central bank digital currencies have enormous potential implications for the payment system and all the providers in the payment systems, from banks and credit cards to merchant acquirers and others. We'll see if it actually goes that far, but it certainly has that potential. Many countries are considering central bank digital currencies. The furthest along is China. Beijing has set up several pilot programs. They're going to roll this out in a big way at the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing this February. If you go there, it might be hard to go because there are all kinds of travel restrictions, but if you go there, and you want a hotel or a meal or a souvenir or tickets for the ice skating, whatever it is, you're going to have to use their central bank digital yuan on whatever app they provide. So that, as I said, they're the furthest along. European Central Bank is looking at it. The Federal Reserve is looking at it more slowly. It'll probably take them a couple of years at least to have a central bank digital currency. But all the major central banks are moving in this direction. Now, the question is why? Why are they doing this? Well, there are a couple of reasons. So on the one hand, it may actually be more efficient and faster and cheaper, as I described. That sounds good. They're sort of competing with the cryptocurrencies. They know that Bitcoin and other currencies have some appeal. The central banks do not regulate Bitcoin. Now, some countries have been much more aggressive in the regulation. China and Turkey, in particular, have had very tough regulation on Bitcoin. That's a policy choice. The United States has not, but maybe moving closer in that direction. But whether you regulate it or not, there's no question that a cryptocurrency is a potential competitor to your own form of fiat money or paper money, or as I said, this inefficient bank payment system that we have. So maybe you want to keep up with the Bitcoin crowd and come up with something that's better, faster, cheaper on your own. Okay, that's probably one of the reasons. But there are a lot of very dark reasons, reasons to be concerned. Number one, this makes it much easier to impose negative interest rates. So right now, if I have $100,000 in the bank and I go away for a year and I come back, there'll be a little bit more, maybe 1%. So maybe I have $101,000 because they paid me 1% interest. But what if they have negative interest rates at 1%? Now I put $100,000 in the bank. I go away for a year and I come back and I only have $99,000 because instead of paying me interest, they took the interest out. That's a negative interest rate. Well, if you don't like that, there's a very simple remedy, which is go down to the bank, get the cash, put it in a suitcase or some container or a vault and bury it in your backyard or whatever. At least you'll still have all your money. You won't make any money, but you won't lose any money either. Well, the central banks know this. They know that they have to eliminate cash. If you want to have negative interest rates, you need to get rid of cash, because cash is an alternative that avoids the negative interest rates. You need to force people into a digital system and get rid of cash so that you can hit them with negative interest rates. If you're going to slaughter cows, you have to herd the cows into a pen and get them into the slaughterhouse. So you can think of central bank digital currencies as a digital slaughterhouse to take your money in the form of negative interest rates, but not just negative interest rates. They can withhold taxes. They can impose penalties. They can impose fines. They can freeze your accounts for various reasons. Everything about government control and the limitation of freedom becomes easier to implement, easier to implement in a world of digital currencies. But it gets worse than that. The central bank digital currency is the last step in the total surveillance state. Because today, we have digital cameras, they have facial recognition software. They can tell who you are. And people say, well, I'll put a mask on because of COVID. I'll put some sunglasses on. I'll pull a ski hat over my head. And you won't know who I am. Well, no, they have digital software that can tell who you are by the way you walk. Gait, in English, G-A-I-T, the way you walk. They have gait recognition software. So again, we're under surveillance by cameras, digital cameras, social media. There's very little privacy left. Well, this would be the last step. Because if you had a central bank digital currency, then they would know your whereabouts. Every time you bought something at the point of purchase, online, retail, or otherwise, they would know where you were, what you were doing, what you were buying. What if you were giving money to an unpopular political candidate? What if you were going to a rally that was protesting something about the regime? And this is true of every country in the world. It's very true in China, but we'll see the same thing in the United States and elsewhere around the world. So the central bank digital currency is the completion of the total surveillance state. It allows governments to track you, know your whereabouts, and perhaps arrest you for doing unpopular things, which they would know about, not because you thought about it, but because you spent the money in a form that they can track in real time. So again, I would warn people, central bank digital currencies are coming. I'm not saying they're not going to be here. They are, but they do very quickly turn into this surveillance technique whereby governments can watch their citizens' whereabouts and greatly limit their freedoms. And we may have hybrids of what I've described. You may see, as I mentioned, a digital crypto SDR. perhaps backed by gold. So you might get gold, SDRs, and cryptocurrencies all merged together. It's impossible to know which one of these forms will evolve, but we do know for sure that all of them are evolving today. All of them are out there. This is not science fiction. All these are in the works. All of these have been implemented in some ways and to some extent. So my advice would be think hard about gold, because gold is the only one that's not digital. It's the only one that's not electronic. And if electronic forms of payment lend themselves to surveillance and government penalties and negative interest rates and seizures or frauds or all the things I talked about, gold is the only one that you can completely rely on. And again, I think Turkey is doing a good job of actually increasing its gold reserves and should probably continue that. I just want to finish my remarks with a few comments that are specific to Turkish capital markets. Turkey, as I've been there many times, is very robust capital markets. The first point I would make with specific regard to Turkey is that cheapening your currency does not promote exports. The rationale is, well, we'll cheapen our currency against the dollar. That'll make our goods less expensive and will increase exports and export-related jobs. That's not how it works, because for two reasons. Number one, other countries' trading partners can cheapen their currencies also. But remember, when you export goods, you probably need imports of some kind. You're going to import components and assemble them, or you're going to import perhaps minerals or other things, and then you're going to manufacture them. Even if you have high-tech goods, like if you assemble iPhones, you're going to import semiconductors and glass, et cetera. So the point is, yeah, cheapening your currency might make your exports more attractive, but you're going to pay more for your inputs that you need. So you really don't get any further ahead. But it does produce inflation, which really steals money from citizens. It's a hidden form of taxation. It's a really relatively unattractive feature from an investment point of view. So cheapening your currency is not a good economic policy for the reasons I mentioned. Higher interest rates will actually strengthen the currency. They're not a sign of weakness, they're a sign of strength. And that will attract capital flows. The way you grow an economy, your central bank has a role, commercial banks have a role, but it's really capital, it's really investment and credit over and above central bank policy that drives economic growth. And if you have market interest rates and a stronger currency, that will attract capital flows, and that will really help the economy grow. The Turkish stock market has been doing fairly well lately. Again, that's taken as a sign of strength, but be careful, because that's very typical in an inflationary environment. It's often the case that inflation comes along, people don't mind inflation. They go, well, yes, my currency is worth less, but look at my stock portfolio, it's going up. But then people forget that the stock portfolio is denominated in the currency, and your stock values may be going up, but if your currency is going down, eventually people will realize that the stocks are worthless or not worth as much as you think. And so there's sort of a delayed reaction. The stock market crash comes later. But if you have a strong stock market and a strong currency, that's a good thing. But if you have a strong stock market and a weaker currency, don't be so sure about the stock market, because that may be a crash waiting to happen based on loss of confidence in the currency itself. Turkey does have has enormous strengths. As an emerging market, developing economy, has a very educated workforce, a very favorable geography, and access to energy, a relatively inexpensive energy. That's a great starting package. Smart people, good location, energy resources. But you have to build on that. You build on that basically with imported capital. So the way forward for Turkey is there's nothing wrong with low to medium value-added assembly style manufacturing. That's fine. It creates a lot of jobs. But you have to move to a high-tech value-added economy. That's how you get out of what's called the middle income trap. Turkey has gone from low income to middle income. That's fairly straightforward. The question is, how do you get to high income, more than $20,000 per year per capita? And the way you don't do that with just more simple manufacturing or even artisanal crafts, tourism. Those are all good things. But you need to do it with high tech, which you can either develop on your own with your university graduates, or acquire through licenses and apply it. But that's the way out of the middle income trap. That's the way to be a high income country. Capital flows are essential to that. And Walter Wriston, my old boss when I worked at Citibank, he said, capital goes where it's welcome and stays where it's well treated. And that's good advice. And it was true 40 years ago and is true today. So what makes capital welcome? Well, the answer is a stable currency, good interest rates, and a good rule of law environment. Then the capital will come in, then the economy can grow. So Turkey has that potential. It's a matter of policy choices. But I'd have Turkey on my list of countries that I think are relatively attractive from an investment point of view. And I'll leave it at that. Again, thank you very much for inviting me. It's great to be with you, and I wish you every success in this Capital Markets Congress. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Rickards. James Rickards'a çok teşekkür ediyoruz efendim.
Thank you so much for